So I truly believe that you can recover and heal from post-traumatic stress injury.
Because someone's diagnosed with post-traumatic stress or because someone's having the symptoms of occupational stress, it's not a life sentence. It doesn't have to destroy you.
PTSD is not a career ender. You can overcome that. Not only does your career continue, but I think most importantly is that your life continues.
I'm living proof that there is life beyond PTSD.
We now have an expansive set of healing modalities, and so much of it is personal. You have to create a healing journey that works for you.
I'm really excited to see all of the focus on emerging therapies and the research backing it to make sure that the therapies are effective, what the long-term downstream effects are, but it's giving responders hope that there is something other than what our traditional response has been.
It's really important for people to understand that they can grow through trauma, and that by getting the right treatment and the right support, they can become stronger than they ever were before.
There is something called post-traumatic growth, where we can grow from what we learned in the past, and these traumatic events don't always have to drag us down. They may change our life forever, but we can grow after these traumatic events.
There is absolute healing out there. You do not have to do this alone. The research and the science shows that there really is a way to heal these injuries.
There is healing, there is hope, there is redemption in everything that you've been through.
It's possible that 30% of first responders are suffering right now from PTS.
It doesn't matter how big and strong you are. Everybody and anybody can suffer from PTSD.
PTSD is real, cumulative trauma is real, and we need to deal with it.
Everybody thinks that nobody else is feeling this. There's something wrong with me because I'm feeling this. And the reality is that everybody's feeling it, but nobody wants to admit it.
There's so many more people experiencing these things and feeling the way we do and hiding it just like we do.
You need to address the situation at hand, but that stigma that we have in the police department, we'll help everybody, but we're the last ones to seek help.
PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is what psychologists use to make a diagnosis. It's what's in our diagnostic and statistical manual.
The DSM identifies how long you have to have the symptoms, how many symptoms, what may be excluding from that, and so it is post-traumatic stress disorder.
A number of people have advocated, including myself, for switching the term to post-traumatic stress injury because we now understand, based on neuroscience-informed innovation, that when we're exposed to stress, there's a biological injury that occurs. And I think that's been the missing piece.
Injury means it's biologic, it's measurable, and you can treat it using biological means.
Calling it PTSI will also reduce the stigma if we see it as partly a biological injury.
PTSD is not an emotional disorder. It's not a weakness of character. It's a biological problem. There are injuries to your brain, and we now can treat those. We can help make PTSD better.
When that car accident happens, or when the tones get dropped even to go to that, we automatically have a release of chemicals in our body causing a parasympathetic overdrive. When that occurs, our brain ends up actually getting flooded with about 30 different chemicals. So it takes about 30 hours for those chemicals to metabolize in your body from that one incident.
You don't even have time to physically allow yourself to just come down from everything that releases in the brain when you're experiencing something like that. You may go from one call to the next, it all piles and you have no processing time.
There's different types of stress that first responders deal with. Critical incident stress from a traumatic event. is one of them, but there is something called cumulative stress. And it may not even be like big events, but repeated events over time, that stress builds up and you have that cumulative stress. So when people talk about PTSD, sometimes it's not one event that pushed them over the edge. It's 20 years of responding to these bad calls.
Police officers, fire, EMS, whoever deals with crises on a regular basis, they're going to have that trauma buildup.
There can be a tendency to push on and suffer in silence in this community, but if you do that, then the problem will often build and get much worse. Cumulative effect of trauma is just over time going to pile up and create a much bigger problem.
When I say that we have an emotional container inside of us, and that container, when it gets full, that container's full.
It's almost like a jar. When we start our career, it's almost like an empty jar. There's a few things in there from our childhood, from when we're younger, and this jar just keeps filling up as we're exposed to traumatic incidents. And if we don't talk about it, we don't address it, that jar is going to eventually overflow.
This cumulative stress just is there. And because we're not dealing with it, it just keeps building, and that closet can only hold so much of it. And eventually it's going to come out.
The way I managed that trauma is I envisioned the old steel filing cabinets that you would have in the office, and I would stick all my calls in that filing cabinet in specific folders. Towards the end of my career, the files were all over the floor, there was no organization, it was just totally discombobulated.
So you go to a traumatic event and you have a chain on your neck, and then each traumatic event you go to after that, it's like adding another link and another link, but then over time, the chain becomes so heavy that officers get dragged down.
First and foremost, you got to admit you got the problems. You got to see the symptoms and signs in yourself. Then you got to have the courage to go get the help that you need, because the tools are out there. They are there.
There's a lot of resources independent even from the department. There's a lot of national resources to be able to get help to process through that. So don't try and go it alone.
You know, that's why there's people out there that are fighting hard to expose what's available. Because I think ignorance is probably the largest barrier. I think we just have to expose things and let people know that there's stuff out there for them.
So I saw a quote today, and it really spoke to me. PTSD is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of absolute strength. PTSD is earned by doing what others won't do.
There are all different kinds of treatments, and different things work for different people and at different times. There are so many different kinds of therapies that work, and the thing is to find what works for you.
The number one formal treatment for PTSD is talk therapy.
For PTSD, the first one is cognitive processing therapy, CPT, and it is more of a strategic weekly processing of the cognitions and the different images and the scenes that you have in your head. Now there's also cognitive behavioral therapy, which is kind of a mental health therapist 101 that we learn in school. There's also DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, which is looking at how your behaviors and what you say to yourself kind of are in your brain and changing that up.
Group therapy is helpful at addressing some aspects of PTSD, like the shame. So that if you're sitting in a room with a bunch of other first responders and they all are saying, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, you don't feel as isolated, you don't feel as stigmatized, you don't feel as ashamed.
Not every therapist is the same, so finding the one that you can relate to the best is imperative as well.
I think that it is important to find a clinician who is culturally competent, who understands the job, our lingo, our terminology, our shift schedule, our exposure.
It does take a specific kind of person to be able to deal with us. We are a different breed. And it takes a special person to be able to hear what we go through, because when we start talking about this stuff, we start talking about our worst calls. And that person has to be willing and able to hear that.
The other treatment that I finally decided to do is medication. I fought that from the very beginning, and oh my God, medication worked. It like shut off that loop in my head. It got me some sleep. It was transforming.
I think antidepressants and anxiolytic medications are good because they allow you to separate your emotions a little bit, to see what's going on, handle it, work on it, and then you can work on changing it, changing the medication, changing the dose, removing it, discontinuing it.
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, is arguably one of the most, if not the most, effective therapy for helping the brain and the body heal from trauma.
We use bilateral brain stimulation, and there are lots of ways to do that, lots of methods. I use a traditional rapid eye movement method that I facilitate with my hand.
Some therapists will use tones through headphones. Some therapists use a light bar.
You can watch a computer-generated dot that goes onto a screen or a wall. There's also tapping, where people will tap on either leg or either shoulder. So there are many different ways to facilitate the stimulation. What we do is we go in and help the individual to reprocess that memory so that it's no longer disturbing to them when they think about it now.
And that allows that memory of trauma to actually be fully processed.
So we did a lot of EMDR around different situations and a couple of situations at work, and that was mind-blowing how well it works. Anytime I tell anybody to see a therapist, find somebody who does EMDR. It's crazy. I hate it, but it's crazy how well it works.
I'm combining trauma treatment with EMDR along with regular talk therapy to help people get through all the issues they're dealing with.
And it literally changed me from like throwing up and getting a rash and diarrhea when I would think about this call to now being able to accept it as a part of my history with very little emotional attachment to it.
Peer support is an excellent avenue to take. You're surrounded by people that completely understand the diverse experiences that first responders have.
Peer supporters are trained to be a non-judgmental and confidential ear who understands what's happening and to really normalize that for the person who's reaching out to them.
Peer support might be what works for you, or a coach or a consultant. There are many different layers of people out there who can help you.
We're starting to see more and more states across America give confidentiality rights to peer support teams, and that's imperative because we want our brothers and sisters to seek help. We want them to ask for help, to come to you for resources, or just maybe even to listen.
The key to a long-term career as a responder is very early mental health treatment. Very early, before you even notice symptoms, you should be getting preventative care, just like the dentist, just like your blood work. We should be doing preventative mental health care for responders because we know they are exposed to PTSD-inducing incidents almost every shift.
It is very important that responders have a relationship with their peer supporters before the critical incident. It is important that responders have a relationship with somebody who is in the mental health professions before they need them in a crisis situation. That's not the time to establish trust and rapport. You really want to establish that prior, when life is going seemingly well, when it's a regular routine day, so that that foundation of that relationship is built before you actually need it.
When it comes to all the resources out there, really the most important thing is finding the one that works for you. And it's okay. If you start somewhere and it's just not right, don't be afraid to try again.
The brain, when it's subjected to chronic stress or acutely stressful or traumatic incidents, it changes, it alters, and it becomes locked in fight or flight.
Under stress, your brain goes to the amygdala, which I call the Incredible Hulk, which is just throwing punches. It doesn't matter who they're punching, right? Just survive.
Because the amygdala overrides your neocortex, or the new part of the brain. So that controls, if amygdala isn't happy, nobody's happy.
The amygdala is also where anxiety lives, in those reverberating circuits of, if only I'd done something different, my buddy would still be alive. If only I'd done something different, if only I'd done something different.
You can't process information if your brain isn't working correctly. You can't learn skills if your brain isn't working correctly. You can't become functional if your brain's not working correctly.
One of the things I want to emphasize is PTSD is not an emotional problem. It's not a weakness of character. It is a biological problem. It is damage in the brain. And that's where the symptoms come from. That's where the sleep problems come from and the irritability problems come from.
When somebody's experiencing something like post-traumatic stress injury, the brain gets out of balance. The brain doesn't properly produce the right dopamine, serotonin, and other feel-good chemicals in the brain. And that causes this imbalance that begins to happen. And when we have an imbalanced brain, symptoms, mental health symptoms arise.
There is a degenerative destructive process that's caused by certain areas of the brain becoming overactive and releasing inflammatory chemicals that disrupt brain function, things that destroy circuits, things that break down synapses, things that literally kill neurons.
So we have multiple chemicals involved, the norepinephrine, corticosteroid, cortisol, and all these what we consider to be the negative chemicals, the things that make us anxious, the things that make us depressed, the things that make us angry. Well, it's a chemical reaction. It's not something wrong with you.
The brain can create sort of an overactivity response. Cells become more active and they're releasing what's called glutamate. Glutamate is a neurotransmitter that stimulates the brain, but it's also a toxic chemical.
When the bell goes off, your body doesn't know whether it's going to fight a saber-toothed tiger or it's going on an alarm. And a lot of the alarms we go on are not critical. So your body gets ramped up for that. We don't necessarily feel that or know that we're being stressed, but our body releases those chemicals to enable us to fight that saber-toothed tiger. And then when we don't, now we have all these chemicals in our body that are poisonous to the body.
That rush of adrenaline is good when you're doing it on the job, but it wears on you. You don't realize it, and you go decades into this career, and it's affected you mentally, it's affected you physically. You're not turning it off. In some cases, even mine, you're having, like early cardiac problems because of this constant adrenaline. It's fun when it's happening. It's fun when you're young, running and gunning when you're in your 20s and 30s, but when you get older, it takes its toll.
PTSD sets off this whole mess of chemicals being released and parts of the brain that are part of the default mode network becoming overactive, which results in the frontal cortex, our thinking cortex, not being able to work as well, getting shut down. And that leads to degenerative changes in brain cells. For example, the dendrites, which are the little tree-like things on neurons, start to break down. Instead of being fluffy like a willow tree, they kind of look like a pruned rose bush in the winter. And you lose synapses. And so like looking at these really fine fibers, you see these little mushroom bubbles coming off the sides of the fibers. Those are synapses. And in a normal brain, there's a whole mess of them. But in PTSD, there is a loss of synapses. And so you see very few of these little things. The hippocampus, the part of the brain involved in learning and memory, shrinks, gets smaller. And that's a degenerative change. Now, the good news is that with treatment, the hippocampus can enlarge again, that this degenerative change is in fact reversible.
Neurostimulation involves different kinds of energy being introduced to the brain. There's photobiomodulation, that's the use of near-infrared. It's found to be extremely effective for regenerating the brain and rehabbing the brain. Pulsed electromagnetic stimulation, that has also been shown to reduce inflammation, increase blood flow. It's another type of neurostimulation. Transcranial direct current stimulation. This is where electrodes are placed directly on the skin and small pulses of electricity are actually passed through the brain. TMS is transcranial magnetic stimulation. Now that's FDA approved for the treatment of depression.
For anybody that's watching that knows what a PHQ-9 scale is, it's just a way to measure your depression level. 27 is the worst score that you can have, and 0 is the best, obviously. When I started TMS, my score was at 24. When I finished, it was at 6.
Neurostimulation treatment is an incredible treatment. When I have first responder clients who need help and need help now, I'm able to sit down with them and tell them about this treatment, tell them what their map says, tell them what protocol we're going to be using, and provide a guide of somewhere between 8 and 10 sessions when they're going to start feeling relief from their symptoms.
It changed everything. Like, I had 0 anxiety when I was done. My hypervigilance was way, way down.
It puts you in a place where you can reclaim your life. And it's really special when you see somebody get to a place where they've been in enormous amounts of pain for years, and then they find that peace. It's remarkable.
Perfect.
Stellate ganglion block is a really exciting innovation for first responders.
PTSI is not just in your head. It is a biological change in the brain. It's physiologic, it's observable, and it's treatable using biological means.
Stellate ganglion block targets a cluster of nerves in the neck and reboots the adrenaline system by bringing calm back to the body. It's actually an anesthetic that's being injected.
When we do the block, it lasts about 8 to 12 hours. So it temporarily blocks norepinephrine secretion. So a shot that lasts 8 hours can last for years.
The procedure itself was very easy.
I really thought there was going to be some pain involved, and I was very pleased to feel a little pressure in my neck. It was fast. I don't think it took 15 minutes.
I would definitely recommend SGB to anyone dealing with PTS.
It's one of the most exciting innovations, particularly for first responders, because it's very effective and it's very efficient.
Thank you.
Ketamine is one of the safest anesthetics around. What we're using in low-dose ketamine therapy is 1/10 of what's used for anesthesia in the hospital.
And so the ketamine allows the unconscious brain to surface, that allows them to bring up something that normally would be locked in the brain and inaccessible, and process it.
Ketamine has a second mechanism. It turns on a growth factor. That growth factor is called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. BDNF drives brain repair. That then starts to undo all the damage that PTSD caused in the brain.
I've done pre-post brain mapping on people that have received ketamine, and I have seen significant improvement in their overall brain function within 24 hours.
We're seeing a lot of different studies, but some of them can show that you actually have a 70% reduction in depressive symptoms and an almost 40% reduction in suicidal ideation.
Last year, I wound up going to ketamine-assisted therapy, and I found that really brought up a lot of things that I thought I dealt with but hadn't. And I'm sure they're still in there, obviously, but that was really a game changer for me.
Give the brain what it needs to repair itself, and that's BDNF. Remember, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the factor that causes brain repair in the adult brain. You deliver that by giving them ketamine or by giving them multi-watt infrared light therapy. With the right wavelength and with enough power to get through the scalp and the skull and into the brain, we deliver that wavelength to the mitochondria, and that turns on a bunch of things. Number one, it increases activity of the mitochondria, so you get more energy. You also get something like nitric oxide, that lives for about 2 seconds and has some very localized effect. But more importantly, the mitochondria send messages to the DNA saying, turn on these genes. Those are the genes responsible for making brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that growth factor that repairs the brain. It turns on anti-inflammatory chemicals that reduces the inflammation in the brain. It turns on chemicals that interrupts that glutamate storm. You know, so we've talked about there's 30 some odd chemicals that are turned on in the brain in PTSD. This is putting the brakes on a lot of that.
Once I started the treatment, I started getting my life back. It took time, it took several sessions, but I feel like myself again.
Here are a number of symptoms that we've seen with our patients. And so the red bars is before treatment. You see, almost all of our patients came in with depression and irritability and sleep issues. All of these get better.
I think one of the most exciting things is that we're on the forefront of the model of treatment shifting in a really fundamental way. I think psychologists are now starting to see the benefit of teaming up with providers that give stellate ganglion block, ketamine, other powerful biological treatments, and using that in combination with trauma-focused talk therapy is going to get people amazing outcomes.
We're already making scientific breakthroughs and understanding how different kinds of therapies can help folks with PTSD. We're studying it, we're finding ways that we can be more helpful, we're finding treatments that are more effective. So that's a good sign.
I want to tell first responders that there is hope. There are a lot of treatments out there now, including neurostimulation and other treatments that can really help people feel better, move past their trauma, and have hope that they can move forward.
First responders have more options available to them now with this type of technology. It can certainly reduce the symptoms that you're experiencing considerably and bring a great deal of relief.
The number one side effect with PTSD is going to be your anxiety and your depression. Those two things we know have been shown in the research over and over again. Physical activity has a direct correlation. You increase physical activity, it changes the way our brain is operating, and we see reduction in depression, reduction in anxiety.
One of the ways that you naturally can increase what we call serotonin or happy hormones is activity.
Physical health is an important part of dealing with stress and anxiety, helps to improve chemicals in the brain for depression and helps with PTSD.
Exercising is probably one of the best ways to deal with stress. There are studies out there that show that regular exercise is just as good as an antidepressant, and sometimes even better.
And it doesn't have to be heavy cardio or running a marathon, it just needs to be moving. Finding that other activity to increase heart rate, to improve cardio performance. When we exercise, we get that same cortisol reaction that you get during a fight or flight situation. However, your body then learns how to use that cortisol appropriately when we're exercising.
The authentic intention of yoga is mastering the mind and creating an optimal functioning of the psychophysiological system, the mind, body, and nervous system. It allows an actual physiological and mental and neurological change to happen. It can truly accompany those other modalities. The intention is to practice yoga. The action is the yoga postures themselves, but then we have to have an awareness about how we're doing the yoga. That's where the breath comes in. That's where the precision of movement comes in. That's where the repetition of mental messages comes in. All of it is training to keep your mind on the yoga mat, and then you're not thinking about that call.
I feel like all of the yoga is to get to that neural reset part, and to have that calmness to help process the stress has been very rewarding for me.
Sleep deprivation from this job, the residual effects of everything added together, you need an outlet to help you physically as well as mentally. And I think golf does that.
Being out on a golf course, it's very relaxing. Most of our golf courses have trees, they have creeks, they have different waterways. Sand traps, obviously, I'm very good at those. Makes me feel like I'm on a beach.
Being on the golf course is about being out in nature, and you're away from the stresses of a bad call that you might have ran the shift before or a couple days before.
The quietness of most golf courses, I mean, that's the thing. You don't hear all the noise. There are definitely life lessons in golf because you're going to hit it in the woods. And there's days in life where I've hit it in the woods. In my marriage, being a father of 3 kids, and you've got to take your penalty, take the drop. To me, those lessons carry over into life. And it also teaches you that sometimes the little things aren't as important. Like you get upset when you hit it in the sand trap, or you get upset when your kids are bad at school. You just refocus them and yourself, and you move on. You deal with it and you move on to the next shot or the next day.
The foundation is trying to address the PTSD, residual effect, cumulative effect issues, one golf swing at a time.
So there's something extremely therapeutic about being on the beach, out in the sun, in the salt water, connecting with nature.
The ocean reminds you how small you are. It's a very humbling, but a very peaceful, wonderful experience. You can take that time to reflect.
It just takes over your entire brain. You literally can't think about anything else because you're in the middle of the ocean.
There have been a lot of studies on surf therapy, and what they found was that it's particularly effective in the first responder community. Surfing is very beneficial when treating PTSD, and it gives them hope. And that's one of the things we aim to measure when we take people out there.
To just let it all go and not have any stress or any worries, because you're just so focused on what you have to do in that moment and try to catch some waves.
I think connecting with nature is therapeutic, and there's just something that's so pure and organic about being in nature and recentering yourself and really being mindful and knowing what's important in life and what's not, and providing a little bit of perspective.
We really truly feel like with comprehensive wellness programs, with a focus on mental health, a focus on physical well-being, a direction towards being just your best, healthiest self, that we're gonna see less PTSD. We're gonna see better outcomes for those who are struggling because they're able to get the help and resources and there's no stigma attached to it. Yeah, that's our hope, and I think we're moving in the right direction.
So if someone's getting physical therapy or acupuncture or massage, and they're combining that with mental health therapy of any kind, that can be an absolute game changer because we're connected. We're like a big motherboard. All of our wires are connected physically, mentally, and emotionally.
Having faith in a higher power is a legitimate treatment option for PTS.
Faith and spirituality can be a very good treatment option. Trauma changes the way we view life, but so can a spiritual encounter. And so I think that it's very effective. I think those who have experienced it, or they feel a certain amount of peace in studying scripture, that can be very effective.
So I would say my faith has played a very important role in my ability to deal with stress.
a human being is made of a body, spirit, soul. And if we're going to really help someone with post-traumatic stress, we have to treat the whole person. We have to treat them physically, we have to treat them emotionally, and we have to treat them spiritually.
My spirituality has probably been the #1 healer for me, is accepting a higher power, trying to live a God-centered life, a life of service, so to speak.
For me, it was, I found God. I got saved, and I started to go to church.
He had a God moment, and that was really when he was transformed. I mean, almost in a day, I saw so much change in him.
In that going to church, I was developed relationships with healthy people. I got to just talk about it. And the more that I started to talk about it, I felt healing in talking, especially being around a safe place.
It really did change his whole outlook on his purpose and his life.
Just being in a community of people that understood me was probably the most valuable thing, and just trying to give hope to others.
I would definitely say that Daniel's faith saved his life.
Animal-assisted therapy, it's just so soothing, it's so calming, it's so healing, because it's really introspective. You get to learn a lot about yourself.
For me, being around horses is just therapy. It makes me happy, it's my happy place.
I think equine therapy is a wonderful alternative intervention for people who've been suffering with PTSD or complex PTSD. It helps cultivate regulation of the nervous system that can be very restorative.
Horses are very sensitive. They're very intuitive.
The horses will read the energy of the person around them. For me personally, horses call me out on not being present. Horses ask me to slow down to spend time with them.
The horses are the therapists here. They give them feedback on their behavior, on relationships, how they interact with others, and it's very powerful.
When you really connect with an animal and you see that animal as a living, breathing soul, I really think it does provide an extra layer of empathy and compassion and concern that you can bring out into the world as well and connect better with people.
When people are feeling better simply by being with the horses, they can interact differently in their families, they can interact differently at work, they can have different kinds of conversations based from a place of response rather than reaction.
It's just something that people are finally starting to discover is how wonderful these creatures are and actually what great therapists they are.
It helps us settle down, it helps us reconnect and reground and recenter ourselves so we can present a little bit more calmly. And I love this quote, "Until one loves an animal, part of one's soul remains unawakened."
Art therapy gives you a safe space so you can honestly look inside and explore yourself and then express what you feel without being judged. And when you feel those things, begin to ask yourself, where do I connect those feelings with? And really begin to heal from the wounds that we carry because of things we've experienced or seen.
You're using art as like a language, and you're putting it on paper, and as you're doing it, there's certain things inside of you that are unfolding and things that from your past that pop up.
Men and women who went through trauma can stop and begin to use art to begin to see themselves differently in how they feel, how it's okay to feel, it's okay to express. It's okay to let those emotions out.
Art therapy is probably one of the few therapies that a couple can participate in together. So each of you is going to learn about some difficult things that you've been struggling with, and being able to sit next to your partner and be there with them through that is a special thing.
For anyone who's ever had the pleasure of working with a therapy dog, it's just a beautiful thing to bring them into an environment with people who may need just a little bit of love in that moment or a little bit of a break.
Dogs don't judge, so even in the toughest of times, she's there and she's constantly comforting.
There's been studies that show that therapy dogs help with depression, anxiety, PTSD symptoms. It's just that calming effect that these animals have.
From blood pressure reduction to stress management to decompression to just giving people that room to breathe for a second.
We have that serotonin release, so that helps calm the individual and then helps them process the traumatic events a little bit easier.
So a lot of times I bring Sammy to work when I know I'm going to meet with an officer. That starts a conversation, they are immediately drawn to the dog, and then I can start asking questions while they're petting the dog and Sammy's giving some attention and some love to them.
So this is my therapy dog, Athena. We've taken her to the emergency room at the University Hospitals. We take her to critical incidents. We take her to any kind of trainings we have when we talk about PTSD.
When we got Aspen, we knew she had a natural instinct to just comfort everyone and anyone she met. She has this little lean that she does, and it's kind of like an extra hug, like you're squeezing a little bit tighter, and that's kind of her special way of saying, I understand and I'm here for you.
So once the dog comes and smiles at you and opens up their mouth and looks you in the eye, it's hard not to return a smile and just to feel calm. And that's what we're looking for. And that's why I think the beauty of animal-assisted therapy is.
Everyone watching this film has a story. The power is that if we all share our stories, we can all truly make a difference. And I've already seen it starting, but we have to carry this torch on. We need to continue it. But things are changing, things are getting better. And I know for a fact we are saving lives every single day.
You are seeing things being more accepted. You are seeing more people talking about it. You are seeing the salty veterans being more accepted to a change.
The more we talk about it, the more we can prevent suicides.
I'm excited about what's going to come in the next years. I think we're in the beginning of a shift, and the new model of treatment will be the next thing, of combining biological, psychological, and mind-body practices to really get people totally different outcomes than we have in the past.
There are hundreds of trauma-based healing modalities out there that are scientifically validated.
I think years ago, all we had was talk therapy and medications. Now we have so many other modalities available to us, and these modalities are being researched, are being backed by evidence. I think that it's time to take advantage of these other tools. Let's create a treatment plan, a wellness plan that works for each individual.
We are able to connect people to different methods, different facilities, different types of therapies, different types of groups, and it's incredible to see where we're at now.
It's all healing, whether it comes in pills, talk therapy, equine therapy, dog therapy, yoga, EMDR, all of the stuff they have now. Let's just say here are the tools to heal from post-traumatic stress.
Different things work for different people, often at different times.
You've got to find what works for you. And when you find it, stick with it. It's not always going to be perfect, but you're always, as long as you're always putting one step in front of the other, don't quit. Never, ever, ever quit.
The future looks very promising, and yet we're still learning so much more. Moral injury will be the next new term that we'll be looking at in the fire service and the EMS world. These are all positive. We're seeing more and more of our brothers and sisters stand up and say, hey, I need some help.
Post-traumatic growth is resilience. And resilience is a flexible, healthy nervous system where people, once again, are returned to feeling safe in their bodies, in their relationships, and safe in their environments.
We want to keep growing in that post-traumatic growth vein so that we are living a healthy lifestyle that is keeping us more resilient moving forward.
You might have to work for it, but find what works for you.
I got better. I still have work to do, for sure. Like, I still have a lot of work, but you can get better.
But I'm living proof that you can get better. I have a whole new life now, and you can too. And all you have to do is raise your hand and ask for help.
We have a term that we use in law enforcement, tombstone courage. It usually is used in regards to when you go on a call that you should wait for backup. Don't go running in by yourself, right? You see a fight, don't jump in by yourself until you've got backup available. They call it tombstone courage. Or you go into something alone, you're gonna have the hero situation, right? I'm gonna go do this myself. I look at it as tombstone courage if you don't get help when you're suffering from PTS. It's tombstone courage because ultimately, one of two things is going to die. It's either going to be you or it's going to be your career. You don't get the help you need. So ditch the tombstone courage. Forget about the perceptions of other people. Step up, be courageous, recognize your human self, and go get the help that you need. The tools are there. If you really want to have joy and you really want to have happiness in your life, then you need to find a way to get the tools that you need to have a joyous and happy life. You can't ignore the problem. It will not get better without help.